It was actually #1 on YouTube one day after the Oscars, ahead of Jennifer Lawrence. She fell on the stairs at the Oscars, which was amazing because coding is not this super popular mainstream thing. It's a very, very niche thing, or at least I thought it was. But we had not only 10 million views, we had 10,000 teachers writing us saying, can you help us add this to the classroom? And so we started an organization to basically bring computer science into regular schools and regular classrooms. Now, you guys here are obviously very fortunate to have effectively a classroom outside of school and parents that know that this is important enough to get you exposed to this. So I wanted to say a little bit about why I'm doing what I'm doing and how I got into it. I started computer programming when I was 10 years old. I was lucky enough that my dad got me a computer, and I was unlucky enough that he didn't get any software on it, so there were no games, no apps, nothing. And he basically said, this will only do whatever you can program it to do. And here's a book. So I had to basically figure out from the book how to write programs and how to make games and read books about games. But starting from there, I managed to get one of the best paying jobs out of college, and that was about 20 years ago. But even still today, literally the best jobs for people coming out of college or for people who've learned computer programming, and it's had a fantastic impact on my career. But what's actually changed relative to 20 years ago is that computer programming is no longer just for the people who want to get jobs as computer programmers. If you want to become a doctor, or if you want to start your own business selling books, or if you want to run a company or get involved in transportation or entertainment or banking, every field from architecture and agriculture to zoology involves computer science. This year, the Nobel Prize winners in chemistry used computers to figure out something about molecules. Just a few weeks ago, ornithologists who study birds found out for the first time why birds fly in a V shape, and they used computers and software to do that. Literally every field of science, technology, business is getting impacted by computer software, and a very, very slim minority of students worldwide get the ability or the exposure to learn how apps work. So those of you who are doing this, even if you don't stick with it for life as a long-term career, make sure you soak it up because you're very lucky to have this exposure. That's about all I want to say. I could answer questions. I'll answer the first question that most kids usually ask me, which is, what was it like filming Chris Bosch? So I don't know if that's what this room would care, but I'll just answer that one because that's probably the most common question I've heard from the students, which is Chris Bosch is by far the most awesome guy in that video. And he's incredibly down-to-earth and super supportive of kids learning computer programming. In fact, he's gone on the record saying that when he gives up his basketball career, he wants to help more kids learn computer science. So it's really awesome. But anyway, if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yeah?
What is the coding rate? What is the code to code a computer data?
So the code that you write is usually either you type things or you drag and drop things, but it's instructions to tell a computer what you want it to do. So if you want a computer to put something up on the screen, you tell it to put whatever it is you want up on the screen. It's basically commands. So, if you're familiar with a recipe tells a chef how to make some food, or driving directions tell a driver how to get from point A to point B, and code is basically instructions that tell a computer how to do what you want that computer to do. One thing I didn't mention, which I think is probably not even as useful for this group, is we did this campaign last month called the Hour of Code to basically get students anywhere worldwide to do 1 hour of basically learning how to code using any language or any system. And this is an idea we came up with 6 months ago, and back then Code.rrg was a two-person organization, and this idea immediately captured the hearts and minds of lots of schools, teachers, and other organizations. And not only last month, as Greg mentioned, we had 20 million kids do this, most of whom are in the United States, which means literally 1 out of every 4 students in the country did an hour of code. We're still at the point where 1 million students a week are doing this, which is far more than the signups of almost any website out there. Roughly 150,000 students every day are still doing this hour of code, just since we put it out there for the world to do, which is pretty cool. Yep.
What is the traction you are getting with the schools, school boards and things?
So when I started doing this, people thought schools will never adopt it. the school system is super hard to change. Like, good luck. You'll spend 5 years and get really frustrated and then you'll quit. We've seen the exact opposite. We've had an amazing traction with schools. The most awesome traction has been with teachers, especially elementary and middle school teachers, because they have a lot more flexibility of changing their curriculum. We have literally 35,000 teachers now who are basically delivering in the classroom courses that we're sending them online. In fact, I'm not sure anybody has had in so quick a time the ability to deliver courses straight to schools and into classrooms. But more importantly, school districts are actually very interested in this as well. So we've announced partnerships with the #1 largest district in the country in New York, the #3, Chicago, #6, #13. We're basically going through all the school districts of the country one by one and working with them to bring computer science to their mainstream curriculum. That will take many years, but at least they're saying yes rather than saying no, which makes our jobs much easier.
Hadi, we have a young man with a question here.
Yeah.
Like when you started to code on the computer, what program language did you use, and did it feel comfortable? Like, how fast did you get it?
So when I started, the language I used was BASIC, which is relatively easy, but it was by far the easiest thing you could do back then. But the languages today are much, much easier. How many people here have tried Scratch? Yeah, so if you use Scratch, you know that you don't need to type. You just drag and drop things, and things show up on the screen. That's relatively new. It's only been about 7 years that you could write code that way. It used to be you had to type everything. And when you type it, it's not that it's much harder, but if you make one letter wrong, the computer doesn't recognize and tell you, it doesn't fix your mistake for you. You need to make sure you get all the spelling right and put the semicolons in the right place and things like that. And Scratch makes it much easier. When I started, BASIC, was the easy thing to do then. There was all these other languages that are super hard. And once you learn the few words of writing a coding language, the rest becomes much easier. The challenge isn't the language. The challenge is knowing how to put things together and make cooler stuff happen.
How did you gather all of those famous people in your video?
Yeah, that's usually the second most popular question, which is how did you get all those people to get into that video? It actually was surprisingly easy. It's funny because the idea of making a video is something I've had for years. And I'd always envisioned it, the first person in the video as being Steve Jobs. And I only decided I'm going to do this the day he died, because I realized, the lead actor is no longer there. That's why I actually opened the quote with his words. But the first two people I asked were Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, and Drew Houston, the founder of Dropbox. And I happened to be at a fire pit at a conference with them, and I just mentioned them. They said, "That's a great idea, we'll do it." And they were so quick to say yes that I thought, this is a pretty good idea. And so for literally every other person in the video, I asked once, and they said yes. And the difficulty wasn't getting them to say yes. The difficulty was scheduling it on their calendars. So Bill Gates said yes in May, and it took 5.5 months to actually get a 30-minute slot in his calendar to get an interview with him. And Mark Zuckerberg said yes in the middle of May, and it took another 5 months for him also to get scheduled. So, that was just phone calls with their assistants every single week saying, "Can I get a half hour on Bill Gates' schedule, please?" But everybody in that video was highly, highly supportive of this because they know that it's important for our kids' future.
Are you planning on eventually integrating more front-end technologies into Code.rrg? Not technically programming languages, but still coding and technology of that, and how those work together with design to create front-end languages?
So the question is, are we planning on integrating things like HTML or CSS into Code.org? So our long-term mission is focused on schools, and we're building curriculum to put into schools, and some of that curriculum does include HTML and CSS. And we're an unusual site because we're doing marketing and online tutorials, but our main job is getting these online tutorials into schools. So
I work at a startup that every morning I teach user experience design and HTML and CSS to high schoolers, and I found that front-end technology is, front-end development is often, it often interests kids who might not initially interested in additional programming. So I'm just curious as to
Yeah, I mean, the kids want to build cool stuff. The tough thing is, if you want to convince a school to do it, it also needs to be, grounded in some sort of either science or some kind of analytical thinking that makes the school feel good that the curriculum is enriching kids. So teaching just HTML ends up getting it put into a sort of vocational bucket, and it's critical for us to get computer science to be seen as being among sort of the real courses along math and science and so on. So. Yeah, I think if you mix them together, and our most popular course called Exploring Computer Science has a mix of problem solving, HTML, computer programming, data analysis, and robotics, all as a one-year course. And that's probably the fastest spreading computer course in the country, and it includes the front-end stuff.
So you had time for one more?
Yeah, one more question.
How hard would it be to make a game like Portal 2?
So a game like Portal 2 takes probably about 30 to 50 people about 2 years to make. So it's not really easy. That said, a huge amount of that work is the graphics and just the level design. So and the way they do, there's multiple parts of that. There's the game engine, which knows, there's an object here and there's a gun here, or whatever, the robot things that shoot you are here. So the engine displays all that on the screen. And then there's the level builders, and then there's all these artists that are making individual levels. Making one level of Portal 2, if you wanted to add another level with the level builder, that's actually relatively easy. One person can do that in a day. Making the underlying engine, that's the hard part, which takes a team of engineers, many, many months. But if you put your mind to it, the cool thing about computer science is take any big problem, like I just did, and you can chop it up into its subparts, the level builder, the levels, and the engine. And then you look at the engine, you can chop that up into its subparts as well. And the cool thing about learning to code is it teaches you how to take really big problems and chop them up into smaller parts. And just that skill alone is helpful outside of computer programming in general, just in terms of any problem you want to put. Okay, one last question.
Thank you. And until this whole system of coding reaches the schools where our kids go to, what is the learning path you would recommend to a typical 10-year-old?
Well, first of all, since you're at CoderDojo, sticking with this is something I certainly would recommend. It's by far the best way to get kids not just learning, but also in a community so they don't feel like it's a weird, lonely thing you need to do all by yourself. Which sadly is what it is for many people. But the learning path, there's lots of courses online. For a 10-year-old, if they're just getting started, I'd recommend our intro course, which is on Code.rrg. And if they know the basics, then I'd recommend Khan Academy's JavaScript course, which is really, really great. So we have a 20-hour intro course, which is a drag and drop course, and then Khan Academy's course. If you actually visit Code.rrg and hit the Learn button, we have a whole ranking of different courses and tutorials that we recommend.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody.